This is the story of my late wife, Summer Smith. It's a bit of a sad story, but it's a story that I think is important to be told because if one vaccine can help prevent what happened to Summer, it's all worth it. And I'm going to take a few minutes just to walk through that story with you and tell Summer's story. Summer, as you can see by the photo, is just a beautiful, beautiful, kind, caring, wonderful individual. And this is the danger with cervical cancer. It takes women of many ages, but women much too young, away from us. The story starts a number of years ago. I had graduated university and had one of those incredibly exciting jobs right out of school where I was selling copiers. And I was actually in what they call the bullpen, which is where all the sales reps hang out and put their proposals together. And there was an older gentleman who was kind of the star sales rep at the company, and he was standing with my sales manager, and he was showing a photo of his two daughters. And I was walking by at that point, 22, 23 years old, single, and kind of leaned over his shoulder and saw these two beautiful women, and said, "Bob, help a brother out over here, hook me up." And he turned around smiling, but nonetheless said, "Over my dead body, Brent, will I be?" Well, it was 2 years later, and a mutual friend of Summer's and mine had quietly orchestrated a dinner in which she wanted us to meet. And we were out with a number of people, and I met Summer, and we hit it off right away. And we'd hung out a number of times. And then one day we were planning our next date, and I had mentioned that I was going to a concert with a friend of mine who I used to work with at Xerox, was the company. And I got a quick email back from her saying, "You worked at Xerox, my dad's Bob Smith, you worked there. Oh my gosh, call me right now." So gave her a call, and we chatted for a little while, and I told her the story, and it just seemed like fate kind of intervened. So the first time I went to meet the family, I was walking up the front steps to her house, and I heard a shout out of the window saying, "Brett, I told you over my dead body. Get out of here." But nonetheless, I got a big hug from him when I opened the door. Summer was a little put off. She expected me to call him Mr. Smith, but I was a little less formal with him. I knew him as Bob, so it was Bob right from the get-go. We dated for a number of years, and over the course of the years, like any relationship, we were sexually active. At one point, we started seeing a few symptoms, and really that one symptom was just some spotting after sexual intercourse, and it started to get a little worse over time. Summer had her Pap test done regularly, but unfortunately there wasn't any early screening or any diagnosis of the challenge. And the symptom of post-intercourse bleeding got worse and worse, to the point where finally, after seeing the local GP and local gyno, we've been recommended to head down to Princess Margaret Hospital. And I should say this right now, I'm from Toronto, don't hold that against me. This story takes place in Toronto. We went down to Princess Margaret Hospital, and together Summer went through a battery of tests. A number of tests. At that time, still, the feeling was from the doctors we were consulting with that it was likely just an irregularly shaped cervix, but there was a chance that it could have been cervical cancer. Went through a number of tests. There was one test the following day, just a very minor one that Summer had to go through, and she decided it was such a small one, she'll just go down by herself. So she's waiting for that one final test to be finished and sitting and waiting. And a doctor had come up to her and asked her if her name was Summer Smith. And she indicated yes, that was her name. And he asked her if she wanted to take part in an experimental program. And she was kind of confused, and she said, "I'm not really sure why you're asking me this." And he said, "Well, I have you down on my list as having cervical cancer." A mistake, and a mistake nonetheless, but one in which she was by herself, down at Princess Margaret Hospital, and she found out that she had cervical cancer. So the next day, the whole family went down for what was the official diagnosis, and we were unfortunate to find out that day. Oh, sorry, what I should say is, again, she was by herself. I got a quick call from her on the cell phone, rushed over, and if anyone who's been in Toronto knows this, there's kind of Hospital Row along University Avenue there, and there's about 5 hospitals, and it's a big wide street with a boulevard down the middle, and there she was, sitting by herself, just sobbing and crying, and I got there as quick as I could to help her. The next day we got the official diagnosis with her parents and her sister, and we were told, and some of the facts escape me now, but it was a late stage, I think it was term 3B, and a very late stage of cervical cancer, and one that they didn't hold out a lot of hope, but with her age and her strength and her health, we hoped that we would be able to fight it and win. So we spent that summer together. We were living together still without her parents, and Summer did both chemo and radiation throughout the course of that summer. We had it was a tough go, like any chemo and radiation is for any cancer patient. It was very difficult, quite often very nauseous, and a lot of pain. Looking back, obviously, as the cancer was spreading, and a lot of pain. But people and the generosity of people made things as easy as possible. One story that sticks out in my mind was at this point I was working for the ad agency that I'm with now, and we were living alone, as I mentioned, and every day I would walk into work and there was a fresh prepared meal available for us so that we could go home and have dinner together. In summer, obviously, didn't have to worry about cooking. I didn't have to worry about cooking, but we could spend that evening together just chatting. That was one of the really nice things that happened. There's a few others here. I just want to, excuse me for a second. Oh, and of course we do the other things like the family. We all shaved our heads to support her, and just really came together closely, both sides of the family, as she fought this. But she did feel worse as the summer went along. We had one beautiful day where her mom owned a little Miata convertible, which was one of her better days. We escaped out and drove around the Hockley Valley area of Ontario and got away. But for the most part, that summer was quite painful and discomforting for her. But the chemo and radiation seemed to go well. And through the course of the fall and early winter, things were looking up. And many of the symptoms that she was experiencing went away. And we thought we were, for the most part, in the clear. It also happened at a nice time where when she was feeling much better, we were planning our wedding. And the idea was for us to be wed this following summer. We decided on June 21st, which was the first day of summer, and we were going to have this celebration of what was hopefully our life together. But early spring rolled around, and she wasn't feeling that well. Spring became early summer, and the symptoms came back. Really, it was just a significant amount of nausea and discomfort in her abdomen, and obviously in the cervical area. And by the time of our wedding, the Friday night beforehand, it was probably one of the saddest nights of my life. We were about 8:30 at night, and she was literally writhing in agony. She was in so much pain and discomfort. And but the next, when she, being the courageous person that she was, said, "Let's put it off." We were about to start making some calls and cancel the wedding the next day. But the next morning, she woke up, and it was probably the best day of the entire summer, where she felt like she had felt 3 years ago. It was amazing. And we got married on a day that no one would have guessed that she had cancer. It was incredible. We spent our honeymoon in Boston, and we went down with her parents. So we came back, and she started on a chemo program through July and August. The chemo program didn't go well. The effects of that chemotherapy just took hold even greater than the previous summer. One evening, we, as much as you know what you're supposed to do, and as much as Summer was courageous and fought it every day, one day she just forgot to drink as many fluids as she was supposed to. We had tons of Ensure, Gatorade, water, and I turned my back for a moment, and she was having a seizure on the floor in our bathroom. And her eyes were rolling in the back of her head, and I'm trying to get water down her throat. I pick her up. Luckily, the local hospital is only 5 minutes away. Put her in the car, drive her down to the hospital. Got admitted right away. She was losing control of all her bodily functions. And there, I was 27 years old with my wife, and I thought I was losing her. But they stabilized her, got a lot of fluids into her, and we were back home the next day. About a week later, she woke up in the middle of the night with her stomach distended about 6 to 7 times the size of what a stomach normally would be. We rushed to the hospital again. They put a tube up her nose and down through her throat and her stomach and pumped all the bile and what have you out of her stomach. The cancer was very obviously spreading. This happened again 2 more times, and at that point, on the 3rd time, they recommended that we move down permanently to Princess Margaret Hospital in Toronto. It was the first day after the September long weekend, and Summer never left. We went down, and that fall and winter were spent at Princess Margaret. Here she is, 27 years old. Her kidneys failed on her a few times, had 2 operations on her kidneys. At one point, She was starting to lose control of her bowels. They performed a colostomy. I remember heading back to the office after being told that she was going to have a colostomy performed, and I really didn't know what that was. And I remember just the blood like leaving my body, understanding that this 27-year-old woman was going to be walking around, if she survived this, for the rest of her life with a bag attached to her stomach and her intestine outside of her stomach. And it just was so sad. From there, the veins in her legs started to become more porous, and her legs swelled up to about 4 to 5 times the size of what your legs normally are. And her body just broke down. And this is the thing about cervical cancer, particularly with women and young men who are the age that we were. You were sheltered at that age from what cancer really is. We hadn't ever experienced it. You know, if we had a family member that had cancer, our parents weren't taking us to visit them. We didn't know what it was. And here it is in front of you, a 27-year-old woman's body's just breaking down on her. December 25th was probably the saddest day, because it was on the 24th that we were told by the doctors that we needed to prepare for the worst. There was no chance she was going to get better. Both sides of the family spent that Christmas day down at the hospital, turkey sandwiches, trying to be as jovial as we could. But it was a tough go. And January 25th rolled around. It was a Sunday morning. I always went over every morning from about 6:30 in the morning to about 9:30, and would go to the office, come back at about 4:30. On the weekends, they were really great. I'd stay over every Saturday night and Friday night. And so I had stayed over Saturday night. My sister came by Sunday morning at about 7:30 in the morning. She had a 6-month-old baby girl named Holly. And Summer was having probably the best morning she'd had in a number of weeks. And I think it was just that sense of, this is the next generation. It was the first niece or nephew either of us had on either side of the family. And we spent the morning with Holly. And Summer, of course, wasn't feeling that well, but enough that she really enjoyed that. My sister and Holly left. Her dad showed up, and I think it was at that point, just psychologically, with the 2 men of her life in her room, immediately within 5 minutes of her father being there, she started to break down. And she, whether it was, to this day, I don't know exactly what it was, whether it was fluid in her lungs, her breathing became incredibly labored. She couldn't speak. We were told that we had maybe a few hours. We called her mother, her sister, and her best friend down to the hospital for the remainder of the day. And we spent the day together on the Sunday, and at 7 o'clock that night, she died in our arms. It's a very sad story, because you're 27 years old with your whole life in front of you, and knowing that there now, you know, looking back on this, that there is a drug available that could help prevent it, it's something we have to take incredibly serious. And this is just one example of it. It's happening all over Canada, and it can be prevented. So I encourage us to look at those ways of prevention. Dr. Ogilvy had mentioned this, you know, the cost benefit of it, and that's just one thing I want to leave on is I can't imagine what the cost was for her to stay 6 months in Princess Margaret Hospital full time, 4 operations, all the fertility drugs, everything that was covered by the government. Yes, it's a small portion of the total population that gets cancer, that has cervical cancer, but when it happens to someone that's young, you fight as hard as possible to prevent it. And I can imagine the cost benefit goes much beyond dollars and cents, of course. So that's Summer's story. I know it's not a incredibly uplifting one, but it's one that we want to share with you. There's a good news to this, just personally for me, just so you know. I'm out in Vancouver. A great opportunity came up through work. I met a wonderful woman about 1.5 years ago, 2 years ago. She was my client. So we kept that quiet for about 6 months. And then an opportunity to move to Vancouver, a wonderful city, came up, and we've moved out here. And just before the Christmas break, got engaged. So life's very good as it is right now, and looking great moving forward. So thanks for the opportunity to share my story, and in particular Summer's story.